Hello, this is Ringa and welcome to my pixel tutorial. Let me start off by saying this is just a tutorial on how I personally do pixels. This is not the way to do pixels in any shape or form. This is just the way I personally do it, and it's probably a pretty bad way of doing it. Okay, let's start off by taking your sketch, which I'm assuming you've drawn on a normal size canvas, and shrinking it down to the canvas size we're going to work on. To do this, on Sci at least, you go into Canvas, Change Resolution. This then either squashes or expands the whole image, unlike Change Size, which just cuts pixels out or adds them in. Now I'm going to resize mine to 150 pixels high, because that's as big as DA will let you upload without a preview image. And that's the only reason I chose that size. Okay, I suggest saving this file under a different name so you still have your full-size sketch in case anything goes wrong. As you see here, I like to have my file open in two windows on Sci. You can do this by going into View, New. I like to stick this up in the top right hand corner and have it at 100% so I can see what the image looks like in real size without having to zoom in and zoom out all the time. Now I'm just deleting the layers to clean up and getting rid of the background by filling it with the grey that matches the grey on Sci. Right, onto the line art. To do pixel art you need to use the binary tool in Sci, or if you're in Photoshop it's called the pencil tool. Okay, so when I line art, I like to do a new layer for everything. Skin, hair, clothes that are red, clothes that are white, etc, etc. This isn't really a technique I'd usually recommend, it's just something I've picked up and I can't really do without now. But it does make it easier colouring line art later on, as you can just preserve opacity and colour the whole layer instead of colouring pixel by pixel. That's the only real reason I do it. But feel free to do all the line art on one layer, it's totally up to you. As you can see, I usually like to do a layer in a colour first, and then turn it black. This is so I can see where the pixels overlap, so I don't have a skin pixel going on top of the hair, for example. As you can see, because of the way I do things, the layer count is getting pretty damn high. This is why I name every single layer. Because honestly, I can't be asked to go through about 70 different layers, turning them on and off, trying to work out where the bloody hell I've coloured the hair. It really does help, and I know it's a pain doing it, but honestly you won't regret it. Especially if you're like me and you have a habit of drawing on the wrong layer, which we all know is one of the most annoying problems to come across. I also recommend sticking stuff in groups, just because it makes it even more neater, and it really helps with animating because you can just have a folder for the bits you're animating and leave the rest alone. For the eyes, which I'm going to animate, I'm just sticking them in a separate folder so they don't get tangled up with the normal line art. I'm not going to animate the blink right now, I'm going to wait until I colour the eyes, just because it saves time. You'll see when I get round to it. Because I've stuck all my static line art in a group together, it now means I can set that group to something called selection source. You can tell when something's on selection source because it turns green. Now when I go to fill in my base colours on a new layer, I can just use the bucket tool with the target set as selection source and click where I want to fill it in. It will use the information from the selection source to know where to fill. Therefore you don't have to piss around with the magic wand tool basically. Right, with all my base layers inside a folder named after them, I'm ready to start shading. I like to use multiply a lot while shading because I think it gives greater colour variation. For example, when shading something boring like black, I can use a grey-purple colour and set it to multiply and get a more interesting look. And with colours like pink, I could use a bluey-grey colour on multiply, and it would give me a colour I wouldn't necessarily pick out on the colour picker. And sometimes these look really good, and sometimes they look naff, so it's kind of hit and miss. If you want more control over your colours, I'd recommend picking them out from the colour picker. But I personally like to experiment with multiplies. Usually I have 2 to 3 layers of normal shading for each colour. And then I have a layer set to multiply, which I colour over with a really dark purpley blue kind of colour. I do this because light sources are usually warm colours, so therefore the shadows would usually be colder colours, and just because it adds some nice colour variation again. Sometimes I do an overlay layer in a nice warm colour for highlights, but since the colours are pretty light here already, it didn't really seem necessary. I then use the darkest colour from the shading as a starting point for the colour for the line art. And because everything's in separate layers in the line art folder, I can simply select the layer and set it to preserve opacity, and then just scribble over it. I can then make parts lighter or darker depending on how I feel. And that's the shading done. Onto the eyes. For the eye shading, I go back into the folder I specifically drew the eye line art in, and just shade it like normal in there. At the end I have one folder consisting of the whole of the eye, inside another folder called Eyes. I then duplicate this folder and edit the line art to make it look like her eyes are slightly more closed. I then do this again, making her eyes look even more closed, and then for the final time making her eyes fully closed. In the end I end up with 4 folders, each with a different stage of her eyes being open. Now that we're ready for animating, I save the file as a PSD. I can then start merging the layers down while still having the full version as a SCI file, so I don't lose anything. I can then start playing around with colours using light purples, pinks, blues, whatever, and setting them to screen. As you can see on the screen, they make some really nice effects. I especially like having a pale yellow glow around the outside of the character. I do this by holding Control and clicking on the main body layer. This will select everything on that layer, and then inverse that and increment it under Selection Increment. At least I think that's how it's pronounced. Actually, I'm pretty sure that isn't how it's pronounced, but I don't really care. On a new layer, I then fill this with a light yellowy colour on the screen and then play around with the opacity until I'm happy. I do this a couple more times so it looks like it's gradually getting lighter on the outside. When I'm happy with all the screen effects, I merge them down into one layer, and then make a copy for each version of the eyes, since Photoshop doesn't like you clipping stuff to groups. And then when that's all done, I'm ready to open into Photoshop. To get the animation toolbar, you simply have to click on Window. It should be the 4th option down on the list. This little bar should pop up with the thumbnail of your image in the far left corner. That's your frame 1. For this image I'm going to do a simple bobbing animation with the blink of the eyes. So for the bobbing part, I duplicate my whole image. Using the rectangle selection tool, I select down to about the knees, and selecting the move tool, I simply move everything down a pixel, including the eyes of course. I then make a new frame. On frame 1 the unaltered version of your image should be visible and nothing else, then on frame 2 the edited version of your file should be visible and nothing else. I set the speed at 0.2, and if you're just doing a simple bounce animation, that is all you need. Since I wanted to do a blink as well, I'd need to duplicate these 2 layers. I'm going to do that by simply holding Shift and selecting both of them, and clicking and dragging them onto the new frame icon. I keep doing this until I have as many as I need. Then I randomly pick one and start the blink process. I turn off the full open eye, put on the semi-open eye. On the next frame I turn off the full open eye and put on the even more closed eye. Then on the 4th frame I put on the fully closed eye, and then I reverse the process. The blink doesn't really look natural with this timing, so I have to mess around with the timings here and there. But in the end I get a pretty nice result. And that's it, you're done. Save, and then you just need to export the file. Simply going into Save As and then selecting GIF won't export the animation, and this confused the hell out of me when I first tried. But what you have to do is go into File, Save for Web and Devices. A box will come up, don't worry about it, don't change anything, just press OK, and it will give you the option to export your file as a GIF. And that's it folks, I hope that was helpful, although it probably wasn't. I'm sorry for my terrible explaining skills, but I am trying my best. Thank you for watching.